Hello, my name is Fran Stoddard, and today's event on regional cooperation is offered jointly by the Orton Family Foundation and the Citizens Institute on Rural Design, an initiative of the National Endowment for the Arts. For this webinar, we have 4 terrific speakers who will help us understand how towns can support each other, pool resources, and cooperate across town boundaries to gain efficiencies and improve quality of life in small cities and towns. Joining us today are Brett Schwartz of the National Association of Development Organizations that probably most of you know better as NADO. He is at the Research Foundation there. Hi, Brett. Welcome.
Hey, Fran. How you doing?
Great. We also have Sarah Lucas of Networks Northwest in Northwest Michigan. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
And Laura Meadows is with us. She is the Executive Director of the Kentucky Arts Council. Hi, Lori.
Hi. Glad to be here.
Okay. And we have Susan
DuPlessis.
DuPlessis. Should have practiced. Thank you, Susan.
2 plus 3. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
She's the Program Director of the South Carolina Arts Commission. First, I'm going to cover a few quick logistics. Each guest will then offer brief 5 to 7 minute presentations. And after that, we'll have an interactive time of questions from all of you participants. Because we have nearly 235 registrants for our webinar today from 45 states and 4 countries, we'll also be muting our listeners to get as clean an audio signal as possible. Be sure you click on the Adobe Connect platform link that came with your email to follow along with the presenter's visuals and to enter your questions. Many of you have already sent in questions, and we thank you for that. Our speakers have reviewed them, and many will be answered during the initial presentations. We will also be you will have the opportunity to ask questions during and after the presentations in a Q&A box that's right there on the Adobe Connect platform screen. If you have any technical problems, you can dial *0 for phone issues or email Caitlin Davison at cdavison@orton.org, which is on your screen. But please use the Q&A box for any content questions for our guests. Thank you very much, and let's get on with the webinar. So Brett Schwartz serves as the program manager at the NADO Research Foundation, managing capacity building programs for rural communities and small towns. His work covers topics including economic diversification strategies, asset-based economic development, and community engagement. Many of his programs are aimed at cross-border cooperation, including training, research, and peer networking services in the areas of economic and disaster resilience, transportation, and sustainable community development. Brett is also a graduate of the University of Baltimore School of Law, where he focused on land use issues. Welcome, Brett, and take it away with your presentation. It's so great to have you here. Go ahead.
Excellent. Thanks, Fran. Thanks so much, and hello to all of you listening in. It's a real honor to join you all today, especially knowing how many of you are tuned in. First, I want to give a special thank you to Caitlin Davison at Orton for inviting me to participate. As Frank said, I'm Brett Schwartz with the National Association of Development Organizations, and we are a membership association of regional planning commissions and councils of government that serve primarily small metropolitan and rural regions. And I'll talk a bit more about our work later on, what types of resources that we provide. But I think my role on today's webinar is really that of the opening act in some ways for Sarah, Lori, and Susan, who will share some really powerful examples of regional collaboration happening on the ground in their communities. So I want to help kind of frame those presentations by giving an overview of what we mean by regionalism and why it's so important, especially in rural places. So with that, let's jump into the presentation. Perfect. So first, a definition of regionalism, and I've taken this one from one of my mentors in the field of regional development, Steve Etcher. And Steve is a former executive director of the Boone's Lake Regional Planning Commission located in Warrenton, Missouri. And Steve has said that regionalism is a committed effort to improve communities through increased coordination and collaboration, maximizing efficiency through united approaches while preserving individual aspirations. And so at the heart of regional cooperation is really striking that delicate balance of united approaches and individual aspirations. And this, of course, is no easy feat, particularly in rural America. As you know, small towns compete for businesses, for residents, tourists, and limited funding. And that doesn't even, cover town rivalries, that are often sparked by high school sports, in many parts of the country. So in many places, small towns may operate as little islands unto themselves, fighting for resources and recognition, and competition is the norm. But for those of you who work in regional planning and economic development, arts, culture, tourism, or natural resource protection, you know that working across jurisdictional lines, breaking down those barriers is critical to meeting your goals. So here's just a few examples of why it's so important to think regionally in rural places. And I don't have time to dive too deep into any of these, but I hope all of these reasons resonate with you and make the case for working collaboratively across town and county borders. Economies, natural landscapes, and yes, their natural disasters are often regional in nature and require an all-hands-on-deck approach, particularly in rural places where resources and support may be limited. So regionalism is complex, it's often messy, and takes time and dedication to nurture. And there's definitely no silver bullet for getting communities, governments, and organizations to think regionally. But here are what I think are kind of three key ingredients for making that happen. And, first you need local and regional champions supporting your project and vision. And champions are those people who are fully invested in seeing your project through to fruition and are willing to contribute, whether financial resources or technical know-how, their social connections, or even their time. And, look outside the box for those champions. And they might not be the people that show up, to town hall meetings or zoning hearings, but they still care about the future of their community. So find out who they are and go do that. Next, you need, strong institutions and governance where collaboration is respected and encouraged. And, governments, of course, look very different in every part of your region, and I know we have an international audience as well. But, places with effective, functioning institutions, municipalities, and really engaged elected officials can make all the difference in forming those cross-cutting partnerships with the public and private sectors. And then finally, you need to, foster a culture of trust and openness. And this means communities and their partners are willing to share ideas and information, reach out, and most importantly, not worry about who is taking credit for the success. Regionalism cannot thrive if towns do not trust each other or are suspicious of each other's motives. So I also wanted to note that, supporting regionalism is also an effective strategy in fostering resilient communities. And we've embraced a really broad and inclusive definition of resilience, and that being the ability of a region or a community to anticipate, withstand, or bounce back from any type of shock or disruption. And this can include natural disasters, hazards, the impacts of climate change, but also those man-made economic shocks, such as the closure of a large employer, the decline of an important industry, and changes in the workforce and population shifts that many of you may be experiencing in your own communities. So while preparing for these impacts are important in all regions and communities of all sizes, rural and smaller places are particularly vulnerable given their size, geography, and resources. So next I just want to give a quick background about my organization and some of the services we have available to support your own regional work. So NADO is a membership association of the country's 500 institutions, or RDOs. And RDOs might be called different things in your region, such as councils of government, economic development districts, regional planning commissions, or some other name. But no matter what these entities are called, they're all multi-jurisdictional planning and development agencies that work at the regional level to improve local governments and communities by promoting economic and community development. So the majority of our membership serve communities just like yours, small metropolitan and rural regions, where our RDOs are particularly important to provide technical assistance and general support with planning, GIS mapping, business and economic development strategies, and other guidance to small communities and towns that may not have the expertise to do so on their own. So I really encourage you to reach out and engage with your local regional development organization if you haven't done so already. If you're unsure which RDO serves your region, please reach out to me afterwards, and I'd certainly be happy to connect you. Now, I'm a program manager with the NADO Research Foundation, which is a nonprofit research affiliate of NADO, and we work on a variety of projects related to issues impacting small metros and rural places, and study and promote regional solutions through our research and training and peer exchanges and publications. So you can see some of the issue areas up on the screen that we work on, as well as some of our publications and images from trainings and workshops we host throughout the country. So All of our publications, webinars, and resources are archived for free on our website at www.nado.org. So I hope you can check those out. And I also wanted to point out that last month we recognized 96 transformative projects from all across the country through our annual Innovation Awards program. And I really encourage you to check out a story map, which you can see a screenshot up there, which we designed in partnership with Esri, which really highlights the stories behind each of these 96 projects, which cover a whole host of areas such as regional planning, economic development, transportation, workforce, community health, and a host of others. Networks Northwest in Michigan received an award for their US 131 corridor planning work. So really excited that Sarah will be speaking right after me and really tell you the story behind that amazing project in just a few minutes. So, yeah, as I wrap things up, I just wanted to kind of share this quote from a book that I read a few years back. And this quote is really talking about kind of personal time management and goal setting, but I feel it really captures the spirit of all the work that we do. And, that is that planning is bringing the future into the present so that you can do something about it now. And I think this is particularly true in rural regions and smaller towns that are facing powerful external and internal changes that are reshaping their communities in both positive and negative ways. So I think this forward thinking, this collaborative regional planning process, really allows residents to envision and create their own future rather than have that future be determined solely by outside economic forces beyond their control. So that's it for me. Again, just the warm-up act here, but I hope I provided a good frame for the three excellent case studies that you're about to hear shortly. So please be in touch afterwards if you have any questions about NADO or our work or our membership. So with that, I'll turn it back to Fran, and thanks again for tuning in.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Brett. Thanks for that quote, well, a couple good quotes, and for those resources and the big picture idea of regionalism and how we can support each other. And Sarah Lucas, who, as you said, her organization was awarded one of your innovation awards, which is awesome. So Sarah Lucas is with us. She has been a practicing planner in Northwest Michigan for 15 years. She is currently the Regional Planning Department Manager of Networks Northwest, where she works closely with local governments, nonprofits, and other community stakeholders in the 10-county Northwest Michigan region on a variety of community issues, including housing and economic development strategies and implementation. She also coordinates and facilitates public outreach strategies and conducts in-depth community research and analysis. The work of Networks Northwest has been noted for its place-making innovations, as we have mentioned. Welcome, Sarah, and go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Fran. Thanks for having me here today. I'm really happy to be here and have the chance to talk with so many other communities that are working through some of the same issues that we are in our region. And I'd also like to thank Brett for that great introduction. There was a lot of information there that I couldn't say it better myself in terms of what regionalism means and how you actually implement some of those great ideas. So thanks again for having me here. And I'm, as Fran said, with Networks Northwest. It's a region in Northwest Michigan, the Northwest Lower Peninsula, I should say. I have a little map here that shows where we are geographically. If you're not familiar with our region, you can see our western boundary. That's all Lake Michigan shoreline. So we have a pretty big area that's diverse in terms of our shoreline communities and our inland areas, but we're all rural. Our entire region is rural. Our biggest community is 15,000 people, and that's 15,000. So a lot of small towns that are dealing with some of the issues that Brett mentioned in terms of limited capacity and limited resources, and so they really look to Networks Northwest to kind of fill in some of the gaps in capacity and resources. We started working with a number of communities in the inland portion of our region. We're starting to make that distinction between shoreline and inland communities that are dealing with a pretty common set of issues. Again, many of them that Brett alluded to, some disinvestment, a history of industrial activity that's kind of changing with the new economy, and they're struggling with lower incomes and are really trying to put themselves in a better place. And we have kind of initiated this regional planning effort called the Framework for Growth and Investment along US 131. It covers 6 communities. It's a pretty long corridor. It's outlined here on the map in green. It goes from Cadillac at the south border of our region up to Petoskey, which is along the Lake Michigan shoreline. It started with the Michigan Regional Prosperity Initiative and the HUD Sustainable Communities Program. With funding from both of those initiatives, we put together a framework for our future plan, which kind of details some of the economic development needs and opportunities in our region. And one of the key implementation activities of that economic development plan or regional growth plan was to address some of the disinvestment and other economic development needs along the US 131 corridor. The Michigan Regional Prosperity Initiative, to back up a little bit, is something that's unique to Michigan. It's a really great program that we've had over the last few years that incentivizes communities to work together as regions and provides some funding for regions to help communities achieve bigger goals. So through that program, we're able to provide some funding to communities for placemaking type projects, planning projects, and in this case, to do a regional economic development plan for the 131 corridor. So with that funding and that support, we started the Framework for Growth and Investment on 131 process in spring and summer 2015, and we kind of kicked it off with, I guess I'd call it a meet and greet. Technically, we've been calling them leadership summits, but they're basically convenings of all of the community leaders along the US 131 corridor. And our first meeting was really interesting. We had a really great turnout of all of, the city council members and the village council members and county board members from all of these kind of far-flung communities. And we brought them together with a lot of representatives from the state to talk about what programs are available to these communities from the state. And we also wanted to kind of get people to start talking to each other at that first Leadership Summit meeting about what they had in common and what they were looking forward to and what they were struggling to address. And initially there was a lot of suspicion and resistance to working together. After that first meeting, though, I think that it was kind of funny. I think one of the first commonalities that people discovered was kind of their frustrations with the state. And I think that we followed up that first meeting with a second leadership summit that asked people to sit down and talk in a lot of detail about what they were hoping to address. And I think they were all really surprised at how much they had in common and couldn't believe that they hadn't met each other before and that they hadn't been working on some of these issues together in the past. And so it was a real eye-opener for everyone in the room. And there was a lot of excitement about the potential for what they could do if they combined resources and started working together. A few of the things that came out of that meeting, and I'll talk about them more in the next few slides, but trails and public land are really big assets for all of these communities, and they really saw that as an opportunity that they could leverage if they were willing to work together. So that was something that came out of that first meeting and kind of united people around regionalism and sort of pushed the initiative forward. So those leadership summits started last year. They're still going on, and we continue to have just great turnouts and great discussions with all of the people that come. It's a real learning experience for everyone who shows up in that room. But they have actually created a few documents. We have, of course, the overall regional plan, the Framework for Growth and Investment on US 131. But as part of this project, we also created a couple community-specific plans for 2 communities, Kalkaska and Mansalona. Both created an economic development plan, and both of those communities also, with assistance from a marketing consultant, created a target industry market analysis. Like I mentioned earlier, they have a lot of industrial disinvestment, and they're trying to find find ways to attract new investment to those underused properties. So they did a market analysis to help them in that work. So quite a few documents and a lot of things to think about came out of that process. A few of the things, and I alluded to a couple of them, that people were really motivated to talk about together and work on together, the industrial history that all of them are dealing with and trying to promote. Actually, they recognize that in a very tourist-oriented economy like we have in Northwest Michigan, their communities provide a pretty unique niche in terms of industrial opportunities. They know that because of their access to transportation corridors and some of the industrial properties that they already have and industrial activity that they already have going on in their communities, they know that they're well positioned to attract more business. So they have those linkages. A lot of infrastructure is located along that corridor. US 131 is a pretty highly traveled corridor in Michigan and connects northern Michigan with the southern part of the state and Indiana and Illinois. So it's definitely a key asset for attracting business, and they're trying to figure out how to best leverage that. There's sewer and water infrastructure and natural gas, and those are not givens in our region. Not every community has those, so they know that they're in a good spot that they're able to offer those. They also have historic downtowns. A lot of them have seen, some hard times, and they're trying to figure out how to fill vacancies and bring people back into town when the trend has been to move out into the country. So there's quite a few commonalities there. A lot of lower incomes associated with the loss of industry. But as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of recreation assets that haven't really been leveraged, and they're really looking for ways to kind of bring those to the forefront and build some economic opportunities and address some of the negative perceptions that are out there that are related to the lower incomes and loss of industry in those communities. I won't go through the strategies in a lot of detail. I'm sure a lot of your communities have considered similar strategies, but just to give you an idea of some of the big ones they're talking about are becoming development ready and making it easier for businesses to relocate in their towns through zoning and through incentives. They're looking closely at placemaking initiatives to try to improve the quality of life locally, and again, enhancing those recreation assets that have really been kind of underused. And finally, and I think this is one of the things that really got everyone excited about working together, is considering how they can better market and promote their communities as a region. And that's a really important effort that I'll explain a little bit more about. One of the first leadership summits that we had, that this issue came up, that people tend to, there's a certain image associated with a lot of the communities along 131 that they're lower income, that there's nothing going on there. And we all know, when we're familiar with these communities, that they have all of these incredible assets, great schools, lots of opportunities for business, lots of trails, lots of public land. And how do we get that message out there and address some of the negative images that are out there? So there was a lot of interest in how they could better promote their communities. They've created a committee. They're calling it Destination 131 North, and they're really actively pursuing marketing strategies and plans at the same time as they're building trail connectivity and working together with neighboring communities to create a region of trails, I guess you could call it. That's really kind of their economic development priority number one, is to put themselves on the map as a trail destination. At the same time, I mentioned interest in becoming development ready, and a couple of our communities are really going great guns on creating master plans that will take them to the next level in terms of prioritizing development and redevelopment. And I think we're out of time. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have after we get through all of the slides. But thanks again for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this exciting project with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. I love how people who kind of mistrusted each other came together, and it sounds like they're doing a lot of fantastic work. So thank you very much. So we'll move on to great ideas that are happening on the ground. Lori Meadows is with us. She is the Executive Director of the Kentucky Arts Council, where she worked for nearly 20 years. She has worked for nearly 20 years. Prior to her tenure with the Arts Council, she directed the Kentucky Save Outdoor Sculpture and Kentucky Textile programs. She has served on numerous public art advisory committees, including the Federal Art and Architecture Program and the Smithsonian Institute. Her work has included convening a 54-county Appalachian region to initiate economic growth and development through arts-related tools, resources, and ideas. We are so happy to have her on board. Go ahead, Lori.
Okay, thank you so much, Fran. I'm really glad to be a part of this conversation today. As Fran mentioned, I'm with the Kentucky Arts Council. We are the state arts agency. There's an agency like us in each of the 50 states and the U.S. territories. We're funded by the Kentucky General Assembly and the National Endowment for the Arts. And our mission is to foster environments for the people of Kentucky to value, participate in, and benefit from the arts. And I'm going to talk just a bit about some of the work in which we have been involved, and Brett's presentation certainly validated much of what we've experienced, as well as Sarah, some of the different things there. We decided to focus on this particular work based on the needs identified during public input for our 6-year strategic plan and the recommendations that came out of the Creative Industry Report that we released in 2014, and that is a slide of the cover of that report. We investigated ways that we could facilitate bringing people together to learn from each other and to develop networks and partnerships, and what kinds of tools and training that we could provide. And the recommendations that are shown here on the right-hand side are those that came out of the reports relating to the collaboration, rural development, training, and partnerships. A little bit about information about Kentucky. We have some of the same challenges that Sarah mentioned in Michigan. Kentucky has a total of 120 counties, and the area designated by the Appalachian Regional Commission as part of Appalachia is made up of 54 counties in eastern and southeastern Kentucky, and those are the light blue counties that you see on the map. Kentucky has the worst poverty rate in Appalachia, with over 25% of the people below the poverty line, and this has been exacerbated by the decline of the coal industry in the region, with a loss of more than 11,000 coal mining jobs over the last 8 years. So Kentucky, particularly outside of the metropolitan areas, is very much county-oriented. If you ask someone outside of the larger cities where they're from, they'll use the county name instead of the city name. And it's often a struggle to get people to think about working across county lines. So we have specifically focused on the benefits of widening the reach and sharing the resources among the various regions outside of specific cities and counties. And you'll notice some symbols on this: Promise Zone counties, Promise Neighborhood counties, Homegrown, Handmade counties. And I'm going to talk about all of those things just a little bit. And over the past several years, there have been several programs that have been initiated in eastern Kentucky to address issues of poverty, poor health, and lack of education. And we really felt that some of our programs and trainings could be of assistance in addressing these issues. And we knew that bringing together entities that were perhaps not currently working together would be something that we were equipped to facilitate. One of our first initiatives in this area was the convening for Kentucky Art Place in Our Town Creative Placemaking grantees, and those convenings were funded by the Citizens Institute for Rural Design. And through this initial convening, we helped create the Kentucky Creative Commonwealth Network to bring those people together to meet and share resources. And the majority of these grantees were from eastern Kentucky, and they, along with the grantees from the larger communities of Lexington, Louisville, and Covington, are still working together on projects and initiatives. So some of the recent non-arts initiatives in the Appalachian region had specific goals that really resonated with us, and we began by basically inviting ourselves to the table and volunteering our assistance. The SOAR, or Shaping Our Appalachian Region initiative, was developed by then Kentucky Governor Beshear and Kentucky Congressman Hal Rogers to expand job creation, enhance regional opportunities, innovation, and identity, and improve the quality of life. And then the Promise Zone initiative, which you'll hear more about from Susan as well in South Carolina. Kentucky was the first rural promise zone in the nation, and the purpose is to engage the communities in a collaborative, comprehensive process aimed at improving the overall quality of life in the region. So several issues were identified through these initiatives in which the Arts Council felt we could assist, such as providing resources for the development of artists and entrepreneurs, utilizing and building on the existing creative assets in a community, providing statistics on the value of the creative industry, and bringing people from various industries together to work together. We have focused a great deal on business training, particularly in the eastern Kentucky area. We've offered Kaufman training, and we have a lot of partners, people that we had not partnered with before, such as the Mountain Association of Community and Economic Development, the Kentucky Highlands Innovation Center. We also developed some ETSI training where we, again, partnered and we provided the only state-sponsored ETSI training in the nation. I don't know if there are any more yet, but we were the first one. But one of the most really, I would say overwhelmingly, one of the most sought-after and beneficial things we offer is providing training in conducting community creative asset inventories. And after, being asked several times to provide training, we actually created this inventory guide to help communities create a roadmap of the local arts and culture assets, which they could then use to develop and enhance local development and programming. And our Folk and Traditional Arts Director and our Community Arts and Access Director conduct this training across the state. The categories on the right-hand side are the areas in which the guide is broken out in the training, and a critical part of the process, as well as with a lot of the other work that we do, is to bring people from various sectors and regions together to collaborate and to help everybody to help people understand that everyone needs to be at the table. One of our success stories that I'd like to mention today is the Hindman Dulcimer Project in a tiny little community in eastern Kentucky, Hindman, Kentucky. This particular project enhanced the community's sense of identity by looking at what they had and by using that as a starting point, which was the Kentucky Dulcimer. So the initiative began with a Folklife apprenticeship grant from the Kentucky Arts Council, and it's grown well beyond that into an important initiative that really defines Appalachia's contribution to folk music and to Luthery. And the Dulcimer Project has received to further the work. They started the annual Hyman Dulcimer Homecoming, which for the past couple of years has brought luthiers, dulcimer musicians, and other people to tiny Hyman for the three-day event, and also founded the Museum of the Mountain Dulcimer. There have been over 13 more apprenticeships to train people to make the Hyman Dulcimer, and the project received the 2016 Governor's Awards in the Arts for Folk Heritage. And I also want to mention this final project, which is what we are currently involved in. This is the Homegrown Handmade Project, which was designed to develop and implement a pilot project to integrate the arts into farmers markets. This is something that we've been thinking about for a while, and we were thrilled to receive a $51,000 Rural Business Development Grant from USDA to develop the project. It's taking place in Owsley County in eastern Kentucky and Ohio County in west central Kentucky. And we're providing a lot of technical assistance to artists and entrepreneurs on effectively marketing and pricing their work. Artists are also going to be paired with some of the vendors or the farmers market exhibitors that so that they can provide assistance in areas that the sellers might need to help showcase their goods. So maybe it might be designing labels for products or enhancing signage or making the booths more attractive, and then really attracting more buyers to the product and to the farmers market overall. And finally, we're working with them to add musicians performing at the markets, which will really make it a lot more of an event where people will want to spend more time. So, and all of this involves a lot of training. Even though there are only 2 counties included in the pilot, the end product is going to be a handbook for other communities to use for their farmers markets, and we're inviting people to participate in the training from across the region. So again, our work is focusing on collaboration, on working across those county borders that often, people don't seem to want to work across, and showing people that, every success, no matter how small, is a big success. So, there are lots of small things that we're doing, but it's really interesting, exciting work, and we're really glad to be a part of it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lori. So much was there, and I just want to answer a few very quick questions. I think, Lori, it was you that was talking about a training for Etsy, and that's the website for homemade goods, right?
Yes. That's correct, yes.
So that's really terrific. It's ETSY. So that is, I'm sure, really helping sell some of those craft items, which is great. Right. Also, to back up, there's a question about what kinds of trails in Michigan, and the answer is ATV, bicycle, cross-country, ski. I think there are, I'm not sure if that was an answer, or I think that might have answered some of those things. And finally, somebody asked about placemaking and really coming to understand what that is. We will actually be giving you a link at the end of this that you can go to, and you'll go very deep into placemaking and what that's all about. So, but we still have one more terrific presenter. So let's get to Susan. DuPlessis is the program director of the South Carolina Arts Commission. Susan has a wide range of experience in creative place-based work, so she might even talk about placemaking and what that means. And in co-directing several significant partnerships, including the 4-state Gullah Geechee. I hope I've gotten that correct, and she will correct me as soon as I finish my introduction, the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor Commission, South Carolina's Rural Promise Zone, and the Riley Institute at Furman University. Susan will share highlights from a pilot project, The Art of Community, Rural SC, which is part of the South Carolina Promise Zone initiative that was mentioned by, I think, Lori just a minute ago. So welcome, Susan, and go ahead.
Thanks so much, Fran, and I'd like to add my thanks to Orton for including the South Carolina Arts Commission in this presentation today. I'm already learning so much from the other presenters, and really excited to just be part of the conversation. In fact, the word learning is really what our entire initiative is about, the Art of Community Rural SC. It's a new framework for how a state arts commission, ours in South Carolina, is working in community and specifically in the realm of community development. It's always been one of our priority areas, but we typically have come at it from the basis of our infrastructure that was already in place in small rural communities and large metro areas. In this case, we looked at the opportunity that came with the designation of the Rural Promise Zone. As Lori said, Kentucky was the first Rural Promise Zone, and then in April of 2015, the South Carolina Arts Commission, the South Carolina Promise Zone was designated. And so let's see if I can forward. Okay. Whoops. So in this new partnership, the South Carolina Arts Commission looked at the opportunity to become an official partner with the Promise Zone, and that meant that we were actually in on the ground floor working through the strategic planning that happened over 8 different days. In the region, you see the map of South Carolina there. The section that's colored green, these are the 6 counties that we're working specifically in with this new initiative. And so through listening and that experience, listening to local leaders, people from throughout the 6 counties talk about issues that they were facing, we created a new framework, and we've heard the framework earlier, framework term, but we've created a framework for learning, listening, and sharing, and we're doing it with considerations of place, culture, and creativity. And so part of what we've done is we've seized an opportunity to work differently, and it's based on partnership. It's also asset-based, and we're looking at how we build capacity in an area that whose economy was really changed dramatically by the construction of Interstate 95 about 40 or so years ago. And these small communities are still reeling from the changes that came with that, with the construction of that highway. Ultimately, we are looking at this as a way to build new relationships and really feel like that is the basis for the work that we're doing, and is really leading to some amazing new changes and connections that that will continue. This is the first year of a 3-year project, and so we've just finished the first year. And so to give you a little more context about our state and this part of the state, South Carolina, of course, it sits between North Carolina and Georgia, and the 6 counties we're working in have a population of just over 90,000 people and have seen a lot of outflow of people rather than inflow of people. The unemployment rate is almost 15% on average. And so it's an area like many of those that Lori and Sarah described, you know, that struggle with all the things that come when you have an area that is not prospering economically. What's been exciting about the creation of this framework, and I'll tell you more about the specifics of it, is that it's positioned the State Arts Commission, we are a state agency, to work differently and to work at a grassroots level with individuals. And so we've built this program on top of long work that we've done in rural communities. This certainly is not anything new. It's just coming at it a little bit differently. And so one of the big things that we did, I think, that really helped us was participating in that regional strategic planning, and helped us listen and learn and hear from the get-go how organizations and people were feeling about their communities. So, let's see. Sorry. Okay. So one of the first parts of this framework was that we identified local champions. We call them mavens. So one from each of the 6 counties that we're working in, and we asked each of them to identify local teams, up to 6 people from their local community, to join us in this effort. And we began with talking about local stories of place and helping people remember what it was about the place that they lived, that they loved. And we also didn't forget that there are challenges in the places that we're working in, and asked them to also think about what were the challenges, but not to get stuck there. Because one of the things that I learned in participating in the strategic planning process for the 6 counties was that often when you're in a place who is continually told what you don't have, you forget what you do have. And so that's been one of the places of origin that we start at, is remembering what we do have and building from that. We've done a series of regional meetings where we convene, we come together, we listen, we learn. We've asked each of our teams to develop a project that will identify a local challenge, a local community development challenge, and then address that using arts and culture at least as one of the primary ingredients in how you address that. We've done that with the incentive of a $1,000 grant, which we know is a small amount of money, and we look at that as a way to hopefully that they'll use that as a way to leverage more funding to support their local project. So thank you. The third part of this framework is that we have created an advisory committee that is from national to statewide. We've brought together leaders, and we have, you see pictured here, the dean of the branch of the University of South Carolina that's in that region, and we also are co-chaired by Bob Reeder, who's with Rural List. We have a number of other people on our team, and we're having a series of advisory calls where we talk about what's happening in our region, but also get ideas from them nationally to hear what other resources we could be bringing to the table. One of the important things, and I just want to say a special thanks to Lori from Kentucky, who joined us for our field trip to Kentucky back in June. And I can't say enough about how important that trip was for our group. We took our 6 Mavens out of South Carolina. We went to the other rural promise zone to learn from them, to hear how they tell the story of their places and their successes. And we brought that back, and that's really been central to our conversations for going forward. So it helped to create a new framework for thinking, and also to just get us out of our mindsets that we were in. So that was really, really important. We visited also Whitesburg, Kentucky, and spent the day at Apple Shop, which is renowned and was really a wonderful thing. One of the important things, though, that happened as a result of this field trip was that spending 3 days in a van with each other, we really bonded. And so this group that didn't know each other before, the 6 Mavens, now are fast friends, and the bonding that happened through that was incredible. So not only did we make a great connection with Kentucky and learn from them, but our group really came together in an important way. So ultimately, we've created a new formula, but I like to think that we're not being formulaic at the same time. So we asked each of our groups to design a project that would address a community challenge, and that might be around public safety, health, housing, transportation, economic development, workforce, education, or another challenge that they identified. And part of this exercise was to get people at the table thinking about how they tell a story in a compelling way, what makes it urgent, what's the context. And are there more people that care about that challenge than just that community? How does it fit into a larger context? So you see there we've got arts and culture plus the community challenges, plus place, plus assets, plus leadership, which we're also developing through the identification of our Mavens and their team members. We've incentivized it with a $1,000 grant, but looking for other funds to support it. And then, of course, brought the technical assistance from the Arts Commission and funding from USDA, which we're so grateful for, and that's the project that we call the Art of Community Rural SC. So to wrap up, we're in the first of 3 years of this, and we're really excited. Already at the end of this year, we're seeing that new skills are being developed in our rural area. Leadership is blossoming. We're sharing culture. We're sharing successes. We're addressing challenges that many of our rural communities share, and so we're learning from each other in that way. And the regionalism that's coming from this is just fantastic. These groups are starting to meet on their own without the Arts Commission being the one pushing it. And in fact, they've even decided that they're going to do something called the Voice of Promise. And so sort of taken after the Voice television show, they'll be doing a regional competition. And so this is a whole other piece that's happening as a result of this. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Susan. Some great things on the ground, and clearly a lot of support for cooperation. Just to be, we aren't going to let you go quite yet because Michael from Minnesota has asked, what are the pros and cons of cooperation? Are there any downsides of cooperation? And one of the others of you might have this, but Susan, do you see any downside of working towards this cooperation that you've worked so hard at?
I don't see a downside at all. I think that what we're learning in keeping this framework of learning central is that in order to cooperate with another entity or another community, you have to listen and you have to suspend your own desire for a moment to be able to hear what others are facing. And I think within that frame, then you're able to hear and find those areas where there's overlap. So it's just a new skill set, I believe.
Great. Thank you. We'll try to get through a few quick questions. We don't have a lot of time, but another question came in from Jen from Vermont. And she says, within our communities and within the sector, there is increasing divisiveness. It is critical that as organizations with a bird's eye view of all the local work happening, that we, I think, kind of at a statewide or region-wide perspective, provide resources and a space and support to learn and work and debate together well and civilly. People will come to that more easily, she says, when real actionable results come out of that work. The actionable results will be more effective and powerful when they arrive from a sense of alignment versus compromise. So she's really interested in how this work supports that intention of trying to, alignment versus compromise. I'm wondering, Sarah, if you'd like to tackle that a little bit. Are you seeing that results help with that alignment? How do you get to alignment beyond just compromise, or do you feel that there is a tension between those two?
No, actually, I think, and I think one of the other presenters kind of alluded to this. There's not going to be, there's always going to be a little bit of competition and a little bit of working together, and actually some of our project participants have alluded to that where it makes sense to work together, and trails being the obvious example, they are more than happy to line up behind each other. When it comes to things like, what business is going to locate where, there's still a little bit of healthy competition and compromise, but I think that all of our communities recognize that there are places where we can easily align, and if we get to the point where we're competing with each other for businesses, that's a win. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't think it's a one or the other kind of deal.
Okay, thank you. We have Burton from South Carolina wants, and Laura, I'm going to go after you since you've dealt with 54 counties and pulling them together. She hopes that someone will describe an internet strategy, planned use of digital media and related networking tools. I think she's talking about, kind of how can technology be used to communicate among all those stakeholders and or to share out information to the larger community. Lori, how do you keep 54 counties kind of on the same page?
Well, it's really hard, and it doesn't always happen. I think one of the things that we do is try to use as much electronic information as possible, so creating our guidebooks, that sort of thing, making sure they're available electronically, but one of the issues that we have to deal with in eastern Kentucky is that there's not broadband across the entire area. It's something that's being worked on right now, but, it's not always possible for people to communicate as fast as people in the other parts of the state might be. Even things like phone calls. I have board members who have to leave their home and drive into town so that they can get cell phone access. So, it's hard. So we try a variety of different ways. Sometimes it just plain won't work to use, electronic media, and so we go back to printed copies. But we also use a lot of social media because, it's quick little bites and people can get those links or whatever and tie into other things quickly.
Great. Thank you, Lori. Another question is about funding, and Brett, I'm going to reach out to you for this. Any guidance about how funders can encourage and or how they can evaluate applications from collaborative municipal entities? So I guess this person is getting at if municipal entities want to collaborate and they aren't from Michigan where there are incentives, how can they encourage or evaluate applications? Brett, do you have some thoughts on funding?
Yeah, just briefly. Yeah, certainly. I think, we've definitely at the federal level seen an emphasis on regionalism and collaboration, and we've certainly seen that from two projects that were mentioned today, and Sarah talking about the work to emerge from their Sustainable Communities Initiative work up in Michigan, and then certainly the Promise Zones efforts as well. So I think at the federal level, there's a real appreciation for working together regionally, and those communities coming together and demonstrating that. And in some ways, that's actually a prerequisite in some of these applications. Just one example, the Economic Development Administration, which is part of the Department of Commerce, has recently put a set aside for projects that do have that regional element. So they're actually looking specifically at those elements. And if anyone has any questions about that afterwards, I could certainly follow up on some infrastructure projects there too. But I think over the past 8 years in the Obama administration, we've certainly seen a real focus on working together regionally and leveraging those assets. And that's in both large metros, but also in smaller places where, as we talked about, it's really critical that these towns can really show the work that they're doing in a host of sectors. We talked about tourism or manufacturing or outdoor recreation. Small towns working together, I think, really makes you more competitive for some of these projects that are out there.
Great, thank you, Brett. So good luck with everybody on that. Another question came in from Barbara in South Carolina. She asked, how can deliberative dialogue on difficult social problems and rural design and development be combined? So I'm looking at probably either Susan or Lori, who really work with Arts Council. Are there projects where really difficult social problems can be worked on through rural design and development? Susan, want to take that quickly, or
Sure.
Lori, you can chime in.
I would just say that our example that we're doing through the Art of Community Rural SC is one in which we're getting to know each other first, and then we are working on rural design because each one of our teams are working on a design project for their community. And so the nature of what we've created, which is to know people better, to actually have relationships with one another where there are issues of poverty and race relations. If you look at our pictures, you'll see that we're racially a very diverse group. We have gotten to know each other. We're friends. We are beyond stereotypes, and I think that's the first step in doing this.
Thank you.
This is Lori. I would just add to that one of the things that we really look at in that area is accessibility. And I don't just mean physical accessibility, but, does everybody feel welcome? Does everybody feel encouraged and enabled to come and be part of the picture? And I think what Susan was discussing in terms of setting up those relationships is one of the key factors. But we actually have a grant program that deals with accessibility in various areas. And I think, just kind of starting that dialogue certainly helps.
Terrific. We are just about out of time, so I want you all to think of, kind of what your last comments would be for people working on regional collaboration. Carol does come in, though, with a recommendation about resources that act as a how-to manual, as a jumping-off point for growing arts in the region. So if you have a recommendation of kind of how-to manuals for either regional growing arts in a region, why don't you add those to your closing statements? So we're going to go back to Brett. Just a quick sum-up of a last piece of advice for our listeners.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks again for having me on. And this will probably not come as a surprise, but I'd really encourage everyone to reach out and connect with their local regional development organization. If you haven't done so already, these folks have a host of expertise and relationships and technical know-how that can serve small communities and towns with a whole host of areas such as GIS mapping, grant writing, and staff support. So there's certainly conveners and networkers that can help build a regional coalition. So I encourage you to engage them with your work, no matter what field you're working in. And again, if you're unsure which RDO serves your region, please reach out to me and be in touch. But best of luck to all of you, and thanks again for tuning in.
All right, Brett, thank you so much. And Sarah Lucas, your final thoughts.
I guess I'd just encourage people to take the first step and get people in the same room together. I think we mentioned a few times during the course of the presentation how a lack of capacity and resources is one of the biggest challenges we have in implementing regionalism. And recognizing that and understanding that our communities also recognize that. They're understaffed and overworked and don't have a lot of opportunities to educate themselves on a lot of issues. So if there's a way you can provide that education and capacity building to communities, they will come. And I think in the process of learning about some of the development issues in their communities, they'll recognize commonalities with their neighbors, and things kind of build from there. And that's been one of the great successes of our initiative, is that people are so willing to continue to talk and to continue to work together in a group, in part to access that educational opportunity.
Terrific, great reminder. Lori Meadows, go ahead.
Yes, I'd just like to reiterate one of the things I said earlier is that it takes time, and don't get frustrated if things don't happen immediately, because, oftentimes it takes back and forth in working on projects together, and then, then something will click. So this isn't a fast process. The other thing is to, when you're talking about change within a community or development within a community, to make sure that it is a change that the group of people living and working in that community actually want to see. And, it's not led by just a very small group of people, and it doesn't really reflect the entire community, because that is almost a sure chance for failure. So that overall collaboration, creating relationships and bringing people together, I think is critical.
Thank you, Lori. And Susan DuPlessis, your last thoughts and advice to our audience from South Carolina.
Thanks so much, and I just want to concur with what Lori just said about the time factor. It is long work, and just really, really resonate with that. The other thing I wanted to add is just how rewarding and rich this work is, working in community in this way, and especially when you use arts and culture as a kind of binder. I think it creates a freshness in a process that's iterative. And the other thing that I think has been important for the South Carolina Arts Commission in this approach is we've gone into it knowing that we don't know. We have not gone into this work with a prescription for what people should do or what we think they should do. It really has been a learning process that's mutual and listening, and so I think that has made it exciting. It feels creative, and at the same time, by adding the community challenge and keeping that out there is something that we're not ignoring it. It makes, in a way, it makes the aspect of arts and culture even more relevant in communities, and it certainly changes the relevance of the work of a state arts commission in a community.
Well, I want to thank you all. Thanks to Brett, to Sarah, to Lori, to Susan for sharing your stories and your wealth of knowledge. Thank you all for being on board today. It was really terrific, and I see that some of you are answering some of these questions. We didn't get to all of them, but before I just sum up, again, thank you to Brett, Sarah, Laura, and Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. And many thanks to all of you across the U.S. for and well beyond for joining us today. I'd also like to thank CIRD, the Citizens Institute on Rural Design, and the Orton Family Foundation and their folks who run the back room so well and who make these sessions possible. Please take a moment to fill out the survey on the Adobe Connect page. We also recommend checking out the CIRD website at rural-design.org and check out new features that they have there, including a searchable resource library. I also want to send out a shout out for the Rural Creative Placemaking Summit that took place in October. It was a dynamic summit and the first of its kind funded by the NEA. There's a link to an article on the event that is on your screen, and that will help that person who also asked about placemaking. So if you want to know more about placemaking, that would be a great thing to check out. Somebody also asked about getting some of these slides. There is a recording of this webinar that will be sent around to all of you participants, and it will be posted on our website, www.orton.org, which is certainly another cool site to peruse. We hope you join us in January, and thank you, Ashley. I'm sorry I've gone a little over time. I usually try to stay within the hour, but we're just about finished. We hope you join us in January when the Orton Family Foundation partners with the International City and County Management Association, or ICMA, in a call on a better way to do business through engagement. All the best to all of you and your communities. I hope you have enjoyed this, and maybe check in on some of the questions and answers that are up there on the board before we close down today. Thanks to you all. See you next year. Bye-bye.